Thank you, Paul. Ken Sherman, Vice President of Intellitrans. What I want to do today is spend just a couple of minutes telling you who we are, since unlike DHL or Unilever, most of you probably never heard of us, but then really focus most of my time on what we've done in our pilot for the Green Corridor project in iCargo with partners like Storenzo, Traffic for Kenneth, and others. So Intellitrans has been around since 1992, and our headquarters is where I'm located in Atlanta, Georgia. But in Europe we have two offices, one just outside of London where Anthony is from, and then one in Gothenburg. We've got about 100 people in the company, and about 7 years ago we were acquired by Transcore, who is a part of a publicly traded company called Roper Industries. And most people may know Transcore locally because we do a lot in the RFID tag segment. And so, for example, in Sweden, the Arlanda Express uses our technology for the positioning system of the train that runs from the Arlanda airport to downtown Stockholm. The Tube in London uses our technology for the positioning of the various subway vehicles and things like that there. So we've got quite a kind of a global presence there for providing these types of services. And then Intellitrans itself, we really focus on four things. Helping our customers manage their shipments and assets really kind of across all of modes. And it's not just from an IT service provider standpoint where we provide transportation management systems, but it's also providing services to make sure that the information in those systems is complete. So making sure the origin and destination information for every shipment is provided before you consider it complete. Or intervening on shipments that fall into an exception status. For example, a rail wagon has stopped moving. Who is going to actually call the Deutsche Bahn and ask them about the status of that and why it isn't moving? We do that on behalf of our customers. We provide transportation management systems, site operating systems, as well as a series of freight management services where if our client really wants us to help them drive continuous improvement in their operations, not just through the automation that our systems bring, but through taking the potential improvements that are available there and driving that improvement within their operations, we can be the organization that does that for them. And then Transcore is owned by a publicly traded company called Roper Industries, which is about $3 billion in annual revenue, about $12 billion US in stock market valuation. And really the interesting thing here is Roper runs itself more like a bank than an integrated kind of industrial conglomerate. So it provides us with the financial strength behind us to be able to do innovative things with our customers, but they don't meddle around in our business to prevent us from being able to do that. So that's kind of who we are. Our primary focus in the Intellitrans business has typically been the bulk and break bulk commodity industries. And so things like forest products, mining, metals, plastics and chemicals, things like that. And so what we're trying to do in this Green Corridor pilot is enable easy transportation from Scandinavia to the continent and really kind of convert that from truck to multimodal transport. Because the default kind of behavior today is to ship things by truck. Because it's relatively easy. I only need to communicate with one party, and I know that the transit times will be relatively short and relatively reliable compared to the alternatives, and so I don't have to worry as much about the visibility or the transparency side. And so way too often shipments will go by truck even though there's really good potential for them to be able to move by alternative modes. And so what we're doing in this pilot is eliminating the complexity of executing such a move and improving the transparency of that so that you can make sure that you know where the shipment is, when it's going to get there reliably, and eliminate that. We were talking about fear and lack of trust earlier. A lot of the reason people don't ship that way is because of that fear, lack of trust, lack of visibility into what is going on. And so they default to a more costly, less environmentally friendly mode. And so what we want to do is prove that it works, demonstrate the value, and then there's no reason it has to be just from Scandinavia to the continent. Once that concept is proved, it can be from any origin to any destination. And so what we're trying to do with the iCargo initiative is support the carbon footprint reduction. So first and foremost, when a shipper is selecting the mode, in addition to the normal choices they have around transit time and cost, they'll be provided with carbon footprint information. So now they can balance all three at the same time. By integrating this with a best route selection process, they can make that decision more easily to say, yes, I'm willing to take an 8-day transit time because the price is lower and the carbon footprint is lower. And then all we need to do is make sure that that 8-day transit time doesn't become 10 or 12 or 14. Because if it does, then all bets are off and we'll go back to shipping truck and we'll lose all the benefit. So it's not just the execution side, it's the follow-up side to make sure that that promise actually is fulfilled. So the idea is that when someone logs into the platform, they will be able to see the status of everything they've currently got going in one simple place, with any exceptions presented to them right up front, either through the platform or through delivery updates provided to them electronically, email, text message, whatever. Because if they don't know necessarily if something has been adversely impacted by events in the supply chain, and their customer ends up calling them saying, where is this shipment? That is the absolute worst thing you ever want to have happen. If you're going to be late, you want to be able to tell your customer, you're going to be late, it's going to arrive 4 hours late, a day late, whatever that is. Is that okay, or do I need to make alternative plans? And so you have to be able to do that very quickly, very easily, very flexibly. So then, when they get done dealing with the shipments that are already in transit, they want to be able to kind of go in and book a shipment. And so what they want to be able to do is be able to see the various options from getting from point A to point B. And I know the font is really small here, so I'll try to explain this. But what you're able to do is select the origin and destination and the desired transit time, or I'm sorry, the desired departure date, as well as how much you're shipping by ton or by container volume. And then show me the various options sorted by cost, transit, or CO2. And that way it's very easy for the user to come in and say, when is it going to get to where it is going if it departs today? What is the cost of that? What's the total distance traveled? And right now we present the carbon footprint as a reduction in savings versus truck, but we could just present it as a total. And so the idea is that your ability to see what that is going to look like and be able to figure out how you want to do that transportation right up front. So you can balance those three different initiatives. And so what ends up happening here, sorry, I forgot to mention one thing. As we tie into the iCargo ecosystem, a lot of this information is not just like me pulling it or calculating the carbon footprint on my own or loading schedules that I'll show next myself. By tying into the various hexagons that Paulo showed earlier, I can pull those schedules from the iCargo ecosystem and publish them here. Or I can use the carbon footprint calculator provided by the iCargo ecosystem via PTV and use that so there's a common number so that everybody says, I'm using the same tool for calculating carbon footprint, and I'm not arguing about how I calculate it. I'm arguing about whether the numbers are better or worse for the environment. And so there's the ability to pull this information from the iCargo ecosystem to be able to present it easily, to the user community. And then similarly, the schedules can be provided by the logistics service providers to be able to say, here's my availability to take transportation on these days. So think of this like an ocean for like when an ocean booking schedule would be, or short sea shipping or rail or anything like that, where they could say, I provide service Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and if I depart on those days, I will be able to deliver the subsequent Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So those schedules can be pulled into the system from the ecosystem, from the iCargo ecosystem, or they can be loaded in manually. Because we're doing this work in parallel with the building of the entire ecosystem, some of the stuff we have to do ourselves now just to be able to have a functioning pilot. So once the user has gone through and said, I want to be able to choose this because it presents me with the right balance of cost, transit time, and carbon footprint, they can click a book button that takes them to a screen where they can complete the various transportation information required so that they can execute that shipment. Because part of the reason folks will ship by truck today versus alternative multimodal solutions is the ease of the booking process. I just give it and they accept it and I kind of move on. If you have to deal with a truck from the origin port, from the origin mill to the port, and then a short sea shipping company from the port to another port, and then a railway provider from the destination port to the RDC, and then another trucking provider from the RDC to the end customer. That gets very complicated and a lot of people just don't want to do it. This makes it such that you can do that and have that communicated to all parties through the iCargo ecosystem. Then once that is done, you get that confirmation back. Again, you provide it either directly or through the ecosystem. And then we can start tracking the shipment. Because we talked about, one of the reasons people ship by truck is the complexity of the booking process. The other reason is that fear around the transit time. Not only might 8 days be a problem, but if 8 days turns into 10, it's a real problem. And so what we have to be able to do is pull in the status messages from the various hauliers, carriers, etc. Ideally through the iCargo ecosystem, but again, we can pull things in ourselves. And then the user has to have the ability to search on anything they want to be able to search by. Because what's important to shipper A might be a product designation. Shipper B might be a sales order number, or it might be consignee number. So you have to have the ability to have flexible interfaces for being able to do this on a big scale. And then similarly, customers across different industries and even different users within the same customer want to see different pieces of information about the shipments that they're concerned about. And so what we've done is within this is been able to make it such that the user can see anything they want to see about a shipment return by configuring what we call a results template for themselves or through like our product support team. And so if Stig wants to see it by origin, destination, shipper, consignee, dynamic ETA, he can see it displayed as that. Whereas if Anthony wants to see it by product, and then by ETA, then by carrier, then by consignee, he can do that. And all of this is done through configuration such that as we scale up the iCargo ecosystem to deal with more and more shippers, more and more hauliers, you have to be more and more flexible around what they can see. And then as they go from there, they'll also be able to see the display of the transports where they're at on a map. Because some of this has to be visualized on a map for proper planning. So for example, in the US, one of the things that we had to deal with is during hurricane season, when a hurricane comes into, like say, the Houston area, there are a tremendous amount of rail carriers, ports, chemical companies in that area. And so if you look at the Weather Channel and you see where the hurricane is likely to hit, you also want to see which of my assets are in that area. So it's not as easy to do it from text-based kind of data. So you've got to integrate mapping for certain scenarios as well. And then you can click through on this to go back to more of the text-based information. And drill into that status history across all of the different transport providers, across all the different modes that that shipment has traversed to see where it has been, to look for, do I think it's actually going to get to destination on time? Do I need to talk to somebody? Do I need to look at the history for shipment auditing purposes and things like that? And then you can also take this and display this on a map to say, instead of where are all my shipments currently displayed on a map, where has this shipment been throughout its history on a map? So really kind of what we're trying to do in this pilot is really reduce carbon footprint as well as transportation costs. One of the interesting things that you typically will see is that lowering your carbon footprint in general also lowers your transportation cost. Because if you ship by air, that's going to have the highest carbon footprint and the highest cost per ton, then down to LTL, then truckload, then rail, so on and so forth. So we're trying to help people reduce their cost, reduce their carbon footprint, and really ease the interaction with the various transport providers and the multimodal transportation chain to get that to work. And by tying to the iCargo ecosystem, that will really make this much more scalable, much more implementable, because a big part of what ends up happening is you need a nice broad network to be able to make this work. So, like Servet and Paulo were talking about earlier, strongly encourage the participation in the ecosystem, because the more people that participate, the more people that benefit. And so what we're doing is helping people, not because we talked a little bit today around what I would call load factor. How do I go from LTL to truckload? How do I increase that load per truck? And what we're talking about here is the next step is modal conversion. How do I then take that and put it on a lower cost, lower carbon footprint mode and reduce shippers' cost, reduce the carbon footprint, and reduce the number of touches required to execute that. So that's kind of a brief overview of what we're doing in the pilot and who we are. I'd like to open it to any questions.